I recently painted this moody autumn landscape. In today's video, I want to show you my real-time process of how I created depth and atmospheric perspective in this painting, but with the easiest and simplest intuitive watercolor techniques. If you struggle with creating a moody atmosphere in your landscapes, or maybe you want to add a sense of depth and distance in them, or maybe your paintings just look a little bit tight and overworked, then this video is for you. Let's dive right in. I'm starting off with a quick pencil sketch to get the baseline separating the land and the lake, and I'm drawing an outline to keep my forest and its reflection fairly symmetrical. For this painting, I need a professional grade paper that will retain moisture for a long time since I'm painting everything in just one layer, and that's why I chose the Blue Pine Arts 100% cotton 220 GSM watercolor paper from my paper stacks. Now I'm going in with a watered down storm blue and I'm mixing it with some Prussian blue that was already on my palette to create this cool light gray wash that gives the overcast look of a rainy day somewhere in the Pacific Northwest coast maybe. So the colors I choose for a painting is informed by the light and mood I want my painting to depict. In this painting, I'm going for a cold autumn day when it's cloudy and maybe it's just stopped raining. So the colors are not bright, but they're still deep and vibrant. And although the palette I used in this painting is my new Blue Pine Arts Fall Fields palette, I used just a few colors in it that pair well and mix well to give me the light conditions that I want. So here I'm mixing some henna green with Prussian blue and raven black, which is lamp black, to create this really lovely, warm and moody green. And with my brush, I'm laying in these wet in wet marks to create the forest. And as I'm going from left to right, I am reducing the size of the trees to add that linear depth and perspective. And as for the reflections, all I'm doing is just roughly matching the shape of the marks on the top and the shape of the marks at the bottom. It really is as simple as that. I left in some gaps in between the greens to add my burnt oranges. So I just mixed some burnt orange with some poinsettia to give it some depth. And I'm adding that in the gaps that I left previously. I'm also letting all of these colors just touch each other and blend with each other. And I also love mixing my colors on the paper. As you can see here, I'm getting a beautiful rusty brown color when I just lay in that burnt orange color on top of the henna green. And really the technique that I'm using over here is called controlled wet and wet. So the colors are not like running everywhere and mixing and making a big puddle of mud on the paper. Now I'm mixing in henna green, Prussian blue, and raven black to create a darker value of the same green that I used. And again, I'm just laying it, building up the layer in really easy gestural marks and just roughly just matching the top and the bottom. Perfectionism is absolutely not the goal over here. We're just making marks, that's all at this point. So as I'm increasing the value of the colors that I'm putting in, I'm adding more depth and more contrast in my painting. Now I'm also bringing in a little bit of a brown with that Chinar red and adding it a little bit here and there just to kind of complete this autumn palette of colors that are there in my painting. I'm bringing in a little bit more Prussian blue and creating this honey consistency of the paint on my palette. And I'm beginning to add more details on the right side. At this stage, my paper is more damp than wet, so you can see that the marks are retaining their shapes a little bit more. Not worrying about, painting each tree individually because that will just make my painting look tight and overworked. And for the bottom part of my paper, I wanted to still stay wet. So I just use a mist tint bottle to just keep spraying the bottom part of the paper, the reflection part of the painting, to just keep it more wet than the top part. And again, I'm just adding some more pine trees, allowing it to just blend and merge. And as I paint its reflection, I'm just kind of, moving my brush sidewise to just get that reflection, wavy reflection of the trees. At no point in this painting is my paper completely sopping wet. Otherwise, this would just be a mess and the shape of the reflection would not hold. Now I'm mixing in, again, a darker value of this beautiful, beautiful burnt orange with a little bit of poinsettia. And I'm thinking, I always pause and think and just be like, okay, do I want to add it here or not? So pausing before you put your brush strokes in the painting is such an important skill to have as a watercolor artist because you can't really paint over what you've already painted, right? I'm continuing to mist the reflections, the water part of my painting because I want to keep the water part blurrier. And that is what is going to create the separation between the top land part and the bottom lake reflections part. So, to create that atmospheric sense of depth and perspective, as I go from left to right, not only did I reduce the size of the trees in the forest, I'm also reducing the details that I'm putting in. So, over here, you can just see I'm just dragging my brush up and down with the dark green color and just letting that general vertical shapes of the trees happen. I'm not painting in the ruffled pine tree leaves, the branches. And so, what is happening is your brain fills in the details to make it look like the pine trees that are receding in the distance. So, more details on the right side because I want it to appear closer to the viewer. And as I take this farther and farther away from the viewer, I am reducing the details. And that is what creates that sense of beautiful depth and atmospheric perspective in my painting. So already my flat 2D painting looks 3D. So I'm continuing to add a little bit more orange here and there to just kind of make it look like a forest and not individual trees. At this point, I decided to stop putting in more color and fiddling with everything because I didn't really want to overwork things. At this point, I want to add some texture to the land because I think this is looking a little too homogenized. So I'm taking this screwdriver that was just lying on my table and I'm scraping away the paint on the land part. And I really, really love this technique because this is such an easy way to add some wonderful texture and marks to your painting. So you don't need a screwdriver. You can use like old library cards or gift cards, but just be careful you do this on good quality professional grade paper because otherwise it might damage your paper. And now that I've scraped this part, I think I'm going to add a little bit more of this dark green just to create some more separation. And at this point, I just got hit with this inspiration. Very recently, I had been on a hike with my friends to this lake in Banff and I'd seen these fallen logs in the lake. I'm thinking, why not add that? So first, let me add this dark green color to create a further separation between the land and the water because I'm really starting to see this landscape come to life now. And so, inspired by those fallen logs that I saw at this lake in Banff National Park, I'm gonna start scraping away these logs because I just realized that these marks look like those logs floating on water. I really love using simple techniques like this in my watercolor landscapes, and I also really love infusing the landscapes that I see in real life into my paintings because now every time I look at this painting, it's going to remind me of that beautiful autumn hike that I had with my best friends, Kirsten and Dirk, and the wonderful picnic that we had sitting on a lake bank that looked very much like this. Just by this simple scraping technique, the paint gets moved aside and the white of the paper at the bottom shows up. And just like that, bada bing, bada boom, you have these logs on the lake bank. Okay, it's time to start cutting in some reflections. So I'm taking a flat brush, flat damp brush, and I am making sure that I get most of the water out of it. And I'm starting to lift the color in the lake part to get these reflections. This is my favorite and easiest way of adding reflections. So I'm bringing in an extra bit of paper towel because you really gotta, clean your brush in between lifting these colors. And so, yeah, just using a flat brush, its edge, to lift some color to create some easy reflections. Now, as I'm getting closer to the viewer on the left side, I'm making sure that the lines that I'm creating by lifting the color are longer and farther spaced apart. And as I go towards the right side, which is the farthest part into the painting, the reflections are smaller. They're also closer together. So as you can see, I'm lifting more color on the right side. I'm making them longer. Okay, let's make this even more, let's make the perspective even more pronounced. So I'm curving the reflections over here. And just by adding that little bit of extra curvature to the reflections on the left side, it almost feels now that the land is curving as it goes from right side to left side, right? Do you see it? And this is the magic of using very, very simple techniques and observing the rules of nature, right? Like, this is what happens out in nature. If you're at a lake, you'll be able to observe it. Something that is closer to you is going to be way more detailed. These are just like very simple ways of how I add that atmospheric depth and perspective in my landscapes. I'm making sure that I clean my brush thoroughly on this paper towel every time I lift the paint. And as you can see, it's just these really simple techniques that I use that enable me to create a lovely atmospheric depth and effect. Okay, now let's add some more sparkles on the lake and make it, bring it more to life. So what I'm doing is I'm using this blade and I'm lightly scraping the top surface of my paper to add those really brilliant white sparkles. So again, what this does, it just scrapes away the top part of the paper that has the paint on it to reveal the inner layers of the white paper. And this technique I learned from my teacher Sergei Kurbatov when I attended his workshop in Tuscany in 2019. And he taught me how to use this technique to add sparkles to any water surface. And you can also use this to lift the color, not just with your brush, but you can also use your blade to do things like this. And I love these neat little simple tricks to add nature-like elements to my paintings. Okay, you really don't want to overdo this though, because you don't want to damage your paper too much. So be kind of sparse with techniques like this. And just like that, with these white sparkles, you can see that there's just so much more light in this painting. Okay, now I want to add a sense of movement in my paintings. And if you know me at all, you know how much I love adding tiny flying birds. I just love them because they add a contrast to the stillness of the water reflected in the lake with their beautiful movements. And observe how I'm doing this by holding my brush really at the back. I'm not holding my brush really close to the head and getting too, finicky with the marks that I'm putting. Holding my brush at the back allows me to just create very gestural marks, and that creates a very natural movement to the flying birds. I'm also varying the value of the paint that I'm using for the birds. So in some places I'm using a darker color, in other places I'm using lighter color so that it feels like the lighter color birds are actually flying away. Okay, so this is another neat little trick that I use to add more depth and dimension to my painting. And that's it. Using these really simple techniques, I created this beautiful, moody, atmospheric autumn forest reflected in a lake with some fallen logs at the beach, some beautiful flying birds, and really it's about knowing when to stop. So I'm really satisfied with this. And as you can see, the paper just continued drying by itself as I added more and more things. So the final thing to do, of course, is to sign this painting. I always tell my students, sign your paintings and own up to this. Own up to this beauty that you've created. As you can see, it took me about 20 minutes from start to finish to create this beautiful painting. The process that you saw was entirely in real time. I did not speed any of the parts up because I wanted you to get a good idea of how the process unfolded and how much time it really takes to create something like this. I didn't even use a hairdryer to dry my layers or something. It was entirely painted in just one layer. This is why it's so important to work with really good quality professional grade paper when it comes to watercolors, so that not only does it retain moisture for a really long time, but it also dries evenly, which allows you to just continue working at a calm pace. Every time I paint in my studio, even with imaginary landscapes like this or this, I try to infuse inspiration from real life experiences that I've had. I try to incorporate the different landscape elements that I observe, especially when I'm out hiking with my friends in the beautiful Canadian Rockies where I live. In this painting, I added the fallen pine tree logs that I had seen when I'd been on a recent fall hike with my friends in Banff National Park. And I think this adds a memorable story to the landscapes that I'm painting. And it's all about the story and the emotions that it evokes when it comes to painting landscapes, at least for me. All right, to recap, I used super simple watercolor techniques in this painting, like controlled wet and wet, lifting the color to create the ripples in the water, lightly scraping the paper to add more sparkles to the water, as well as using a harmonious color palette. So which of these techniques will you be using in your next painting? Comment below and let me know. If you feel stuck in any of these techniques that I mentioned and you want to find out what are the secret micro adjustments that you need to make in basic foundational watercolor techniques in order to get beautiful effects like this, then I have a free masterclass for you. It's all linked in the description. Also, if you would like to order any of the professional grade Blue Pine Arts handmade watercolor supplies that I showed you, my team and I pour a lot of love in creating them in our studio in India, then you can get 10% off on your first order by joining our insiders list. I'm linking all of that in the description as well. I think I'm supposed to say at this part, please like and subscribe to our channel, and also let me know in the comments what kind of watercolor videos you would like to see next. And if you try this painting, then please tag me on Instagram if you post it there. I would love to see your creations. This painting was just the first one of the autumn landscape series that I'm doing. So join me in my next video where you get to see the process of these two autumn landscapes. These are also fall reflections paintings. Until then, go create.